Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session. As Andrew mentioned, this is for the LLM and other application bioinformatics webinar series. My name is Tushar Mandloi, and I'm a bioinformatician at cancermodels.org. And I'm here to talk about how we used LLMs for large language models for entity extraction of the patient-derived cancer models from publications. This study or project was a collaboration between the Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard, and Harvard Medical School and EBI. I will be going over some background to what are patient-derived cancer models and why they are important for cancer research. Then I'll go over the implementation and experiments along with the evaluation metrics that we use and our results and the future direction. A bit of a background, cancer is still the leading cause of death worldwide. The advancements in cancer research and treatment have led to improvements in cancer-related outcomes over time. However, cancer still remains a significant global health challenge due to its complex and heterogeneous nature. To better understand and study cancer, researchers utilize various patient-derived cancer models. These models aim to capture the characteristics and diversity of tumors observed in patients, and these PDCM can be categorized into xenograft, 2D models, like cell lines, and 3D models such as organoids. These models accurately reflect the patient's tumor, which is analyzed for drug testing, development of personalized medicines, predictive biomarker discovery, etc. We understood the value of these models, but where can you find them? There are various resources and databases that specialize in cancer research and genomics, which provide you with these models, model information, and molecular data. However, with existence of multiple resources and databases, that brings their own challenges, which can be like they use different data formats, they have different analysis pipeline and quality control measures. This means if you want to look for a model of your interest, you need to find a PDCM of your interest. You need to familiarize with their data structure and different sources. And that's where cancermodels.org comes in. We are an open global platform for PDCMs, and you can find more than 10,000 PDCMs. So now you know the value of the PDCMs and how cancermodels.org comes into helping the research community. So let's have a look at the project that we did. So in the last decade, there has been a surge in publications around the PDCMs. And for us, as in cancermodels.org, to be able to provide such a comprehensive resource, manual extraction of publication is a time-consuming and an inefficient method. This brought us to the question how large language models can help us. As LLMs can read and analyze large volume of text, we wanted to evaluate if they can be used for extracting key entities such as genes, treatments, diagnosis, etc. from the publications. And for our implementation, we looked at the proprietary models such as ChatGPT, Gemini, and open models such as MetaLlama 3. We used ChatGPT 4.0 since it's one of the most powerful proprietary LLM at the time of the study, and the Llama 3 for our experiments due to the wider community base and ease of implementation. We define knowledge for the experiments as entities of interest to the researchers working with the PDCMs. For example, the patient diagnosis provides a reference point to, the patient diagnosis provide a reference point to confirm that the PDCM faithfully recapitulates the biology of the tumor. And we selected 15 commonly used attributes as part of the cancermodels.org data model, which were defined in the minimum information standard for the PDX and the in vitro models. And after defining the entities, we did the data collection. So we used 100 abstracts as the gold standard corpus. These abstracts were chosen from the publications linked to the PDCM and submitted to the cancermodels.org platform, where we selected to cover all 3 types of the PDCM, which are PDX organoids and cell lines. 3 annotators independently labeled the entities in all 100 abstracts, and it took roughly around 40 hours in total to annotate these abstracts. And the annotation quality was tracked through the inter-annotator agreement, which is a measure of agreement between each annotation produced by different annotator. The inter-annotator agreement is an indication of how difficult the task is for the humans, and it becomes the target for system development. This data set of 100 abstracts was then split into training, dev, and test set with a ratio of 60-20-20. The training set was used for creating the entity extraction algorithm. The development set was used for refining the algorithm, and the test set for the final evaluation. The annotated abstract visually looked like this, where each annotator labeled the entities they could find in the text, and that's for the data collection. And next thing for our implementation was to decide to use the prompting method. And we got a brief overview of prompting during Andrew's talk at the start of the series. We'll try to go in a bit into the depth on various prompting techniques. Since the emergence of LLMs, various prompting techniques have been proposed. At a high level, these prompting techniques can be divided into 2 categories: direct prompting and soft prompting. In direct prompting, users directly interact with the large language model using the natural language. Is how we interact with ChatGPT. We go and ask him, for example, write a thank you note for an old friend for my parents, and it generates a response. On the other hand, soft prompting uses a machine learning approach to train a sequence of continuous vectors, which are virtual tokens of the prompt. And this technique requires label data to train. For direct prompting, when asking large language model to extract entities such as diagnosis or biomarker, the most intuitive way is to ask the LLM to output the entities directly. Here is an example of a prompt we gave to ChatGPT for entity extraction and for exploration of designing the prompts that include an explicit instruction to specify the character offset of each entity along with the entity type. So we asked it to find the diagnosis defined at the time of collection, and we gave an input query, and it returned with a response where it was able to provide the diagnosis, the character offset, and the end offset. This took us some trial and error, and we were able to design a prompt to get the response with the offsets and the entity. And we had to do some post-processing of the output using regular expression for extracting these values from the text. So at the end, the prompt that we got included a set of instructions which were to tell the model to mark the entities using XML tags. It also included the definition of each entity, 5 code examples to define how we would want the output to look like, and 1 sentence was of the query sentence. The query sentence, we gave one sentence as at a time, and we used Apache CText to split and abstract into sentences. And the other technique that we used was soft prompting, and reason being designing the direct prompts manually is time consuming, which is why we wanted to use soft prompting technique. There are few methods for soft prompting. The difference usually lies in how the prompt vectors are initialized. We used a technique called prompt tuning, where the model learns the prompt by adding a list of virtual tokens in front of the input, where the virtual tokens can be initialized randomly or drawn from the pre-trained word embedding. Each token was assigned a label such as B, which is a beginning of text, I for inside of text, and O for outside of text. After experimenting with the prompts for soft prompt, we found that the length 30 for our use case was ideal. And since now we know about the implementation, let's have a look at the experiments that we did. We used GPT-4o and Llama family models for the direct prompting. And for soft prompting, we focused on the smaller models from Llama family for our experiments. For evaluating the results, we used two types of matches. First one being exact match, which is a strict match between the entities and the ground truth. That means if this is the labeled entity, the output or the response from the model should exactly match. If it doesn't, it will not be considered as a match. And then a bit lenient match strategy, which is overlapping, which allows partial matches. And then we measured these matches using precision recall and F1. And we found in total, from our experiments, 3,313 entities out of the mentions for the 15 entity types that we designed. And the key takeaway from our experiments was soft prompting can significantly improve the smaller LLM performance. If you see here for exact match, the smaller models had very low F1 scores. Whereas when for direct prompting, when we use soft prompting for the smaller models, there was a significant increase in their F1 precision and recall. And for overlapping match, we found similar results. However, GPT-4o for both the cases had outperformed the open models. We also evaluated the results from GPT-4o for each entity type with the inter-annotator score. And there were cases where the LLM exceeded the inter-annotator agreement scores. And there were cases where it was zero because there were no test or dev instances, or there were very few to even get an optimal result. So we show that GPT-4o with direct prompts maintain competitive results, and soft prompting helped improving the performance of smaller LLMs. In conclusion, we showed that the smaller open models can perform closer to the proprietary LLM by using soft prompting method. And from our experiments, we can say the LLMs are powerful but not perfect. And what I mean by that is that we played as part of our future direction, we wanted to try these experiments on full text. And we did experiment with full text, and we found that the large language model started hallucinating, and the response that we got was not accurate, as in it it started using drug names to mark them as biomarkers or genes. So it was inaccurate. And we want another future thing we want to do is to expand the data set to include more abstracts so that we get better generalization. We want to integrate our experiments as part of our integration pipeline. And you can find the preprint for the for this by clicking the link here. And lastly, I would like to thank my team at EBI and our collaborators from Boston Children's Hospital and the project. Any questions?
Brilliant. Thank you, Tushar. So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. If anyone has any more, please do put them in. We're going to take this one first. So you mentioned freezing the LLM and only training the vectors. So this is a bit of a technical question. Did you encounter any difficulties with the gradient flow or optimization when you're training just the soft prompt vectors and keeping the whole model frozen? Were there any challenges with that?
We had to use, let me find the right word, a tokenizer to be able to generate the prompts, but as of right now, I didn't remember any challenges with the gradient flow or optimization.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. And then we have a question about validating the hallucination aspect. So how did you do that? So how did you make sure to evaluate that the output made sense and that it wasn't just making stuff up?
So we evaluated it by comparing the response with the annotator manually labeled annotated the text, and we started comparing the response with the annotated results, and we found that the response from the models were labeling the entities. There were more entities than the labeled text, and we wanted to investigate what's the reason, and we found that it started labeling drugs as biomarkers or vice versa. So it was more of a manual step to make the check because our corpus wasn't that big as well, I feel. So we were able to do it manually.
Okay. So have you any ideas how you would scale that up? Because if you want to run this on full text, then doing that manually for a couple of hundred full text articles is going to be prohibitive, right?
Yes. So we did try with full text, and since we just gave one full text to see if we get any response, and what the response we got was, you would imagine if you give a full text to have a lot of entities.
Mm-hmm.
But what we got as a response was just one entity type, which is biomarker, and numerous occurrence of that same entity. And we were wondering why is that? And when we went through the response, like the results, it made sense. We had found that the model was hallucinating. We tried playing around with the prompts to maybe get it to generate a response which made more sense, but we couldn't optimize or find the best possible way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in and ask one of my own questions at this point, because so you start you using entities and the definitions of them and things. So is this grounded against an ontology? And if it is, which one? And do you think like this sort of activity can feed back into ontology development and kind of make them better by making them more amenable to things that LLMs are going to come up with?
I can't comment much on that, but I am aware that another project as part of our section is trying to work on it using large language models as part of using them to generate or link with ontologies. But I can't comment much on that.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks. So back to the online questions. So the experiment that you did with GPT, That was that done using the API? And if so, did you see how big was the effect on hallucination of changing the temperature parameter in your API calls?
We did use the API, and as far as I remember, it helped in reducing the hallucination, but I don't remember right now by how much or how we adjusted the temperature. But it did impact the hallucination.
So have you got any suggestions, like if we wanted to take your approach and apply it in a completely different field, are there things that you would say this worked really well, you should definitely do this, or this was a terrible idea, we wasted months trying to get that to work, don't do that? What advice would you give for someone who wants to take your approach and apply it in a completely different field?
I think we had to spend a lot of time during creating the prompts.
Mhm.
So if you would want to apply this on other fields, I would recommend spending a lot of time on prompt engineering to play with it with a smaller data set so that you don't spend a lot of time and uh, have like a pilot. And having as for your experiments, having a bigger corpus is going to increase the performance of your models by significantly, is what I feel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so on the kind of the corpus question, how did you handle the significant class imbalance that you've got in your data set? So for categories with very few instances like grade, which has 6 instances, did you do any specialized techniques to improve performance?
Unfortunately, no, because the data set, so the publication were part of the platform cancermodels.org, and we couldn't, since we wanted to focus only on PDCM, we couldn't obtain or find the abstracts which would have all the entity types. So we had to, we kept the corpus as what we had and focus more on the diagnosis, biomarkers, the model type. So certain entities were where we focused a little bit more, because most of the papers would mention them more often than the cancer stage or clinical trial ID or cancer grade.
You showed that in some cases the LLM performs better than the humans. Have you tested against more kind of standard named entity recognition tools? And are the LLMs better than those as well?
Uh, Not as part of this study, but I think that is one of the steps that we wanted to explore, or one of the things we wanted to explore, but
Okay.
we haven't done that yet.
Yeah. Do the NER models exist for the entities that you're extracting, I guess, as a kind of secondary question to that?
Not for all the entities. So that was one of the reasons we did not explore it straight away and then wanted to experiment with the LLM before, because the minimal information standard that which these entities come from, they're only specific to the PDCMs, like the patient-derived cancer models. And we thought, or we wanted to see if LLMs could do better, but we need to compare them as well.
And then somebody would like a bit more of an explanation about how the soft prompting works. So how do you choose the vectors for soft prompting? And how, like, can you go into a little bit more detail how that works and how you train that?
So for soft prompting, we use a library called PEFT, which is prompt tuning from Hugging Face. And what it does is it will take the embedding for each of the entity to create a vector, and each vector is going to be a list of tokens, and each token will have a label, which it would be either B, I, or O. And task is to do token classification from the list of vectors.
Okay, so
Thus,
it's kind of training an adapter that goes on the front of the LLM. to do something to the prompt, which then results in it being good at doing that prompt, that token classification at the end, right? If I've understood that correctly. So the LLM is in the
Yes.
middle and that's left as it is. You put this adapter on the front, which
Yes.
makes it really good at token classification, and then the whole thing gets trained on that data. Right. Okay. Yeah. That makes
Yes.
sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to the person who asked the question as well. Um, what hardware did you use when you were testing the LLMs? Somebody would like to know.
For Llama, if I remember correctly, it was the A80 GPU, which are part of the cluster that we use.
And then Melanie wants to know about your inter-annotator agreement. So did you give the human annotators a chance to resolve conflicts and any kind of annotated text as training examples for the humans? And if yes, then your model will have learned the disagreement from the annotators as well. So I don't know.
Yes, we did give so yes, it is true that the annotator agreement is low. Reason being, the annotators come from different backgrounds. We wanted to have input from different expertise because the PDCM publications have varied mention of the entity in the abstract. So we did give the annotators to resolve the conflict. So we did 3 attempts or 3 go through the annotation process, and that increased the agreement which you see on the tables. But yes, it did lead to the model to learn the disagreement from the annotators.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So did you try asking GPT-4o to display the results for entities in a table, and does that help with getting it to not just focus on, because you said it just annotated everything as a biomarker, which I've seen it do that as well. So does getting it to put its answer in a table help at all with getting it to do all the stuff?
So our expected response was 1 line for each entity, as in if a sentence had a diagnosis, model type, and a biomarker in the same sentence, it will give 3 separate sentences marking 1 entity in each sentence. So it didn't make sense for our use case to have a tabular output, and we had it more like a line per 1 line per entity. So we did not try having a table. It didn't make sense for our use case.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. So there's a question about having considered only abstracts. Do you think that the rest of the paper is not as important as just looking at the abstract? Do you think you can get most of the information you need from there?
So abstract has the most concise or precise or relevant information from the paper. Then that's what we wanted to find as well. Like, can we use the rest of the paper? So what we found was, when we ran the experiments using the full text, there is a lot of extra information in the paper, like introduction, and then even methods are going to have a lot of information which might not be useful for the use case that we wanted to experiment with. And that was one of the reasons we think is the led to the hallucination when we ran it through the full text. But we definitely want to explore more running it on the full text, because we feel there can be more things that can be extracted. Because when I work extracting the information manually, definitely I find more relevant or more information from the full text than the abstract. But we need to find or tune the models that it can process the full text and not hallucinate. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you do this? This is a complete random question for me, but do you have any kind of intuition for why it's hallucinating when it sees the full text more than it is with the abstract?
I think is because when going through the full text, it's processing a lot of unnecessary information, which is leading to poor performance. But since that was just one attempt to see if this can be replicated on full text, we didn't get a chance to fully explore on full text, because this project was done in a short window, which was roughly 3 months, and we couldn't explore a little more furthermore than not just the abstract. A lot of time was spent on prompting methods and running those experiments to see what we find. So we definitely want to explore on full text.
Do you think, as a relative beginner to LLMs and the kind of prompting strategies and things, do you think there's enough hopefully there's enough detail in your preprint to kind of reproduce this and just throw stuff at ChatGPT and see if you can redo it?
I think the preprint is, you should be able to replicate from the methods and all the entity descriptions from in the preprint.
Okay, and then what strategies did you use to deal with ambiguous terminology and context-specific language? Or did you just rely on the LLM to kind of know what to do?
So we provided the definition of the entities. So we provided the LLM with its definition of each entity, which I think So we provided what that entity was, the definition, and the example, how it looks like, which might be the reason why it hallucinated a bit. Like it has acronym here, it has acronym here. That can be a reason, but to focus on the question. So we provided them the entity, the definition, the example, and the instruction, as in mark them using these labels. Provided them example how the response should look like and what was the input given, and that made sure the expected response. That was the strategy that we used.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think you've answered the first half of this question in that GPT isn't providing the definitions, you're given them manually. But how are you validating that the data is accurately qualified for the training and testing of the soft prompting, and what methodologies were part of the training? So I guess, how do you validate that your training data is good? That's the inter-annotator agreement. Did you do anything else on it?
So the data that we picked, the corpus, is linked to the models that are submitted to the platform, and those abstract. Well, there's more publication, obviously more than 100 in the resource linked to the models, but we've picked those 100 so that they included the most entities out of those 15 that we had defined. That was one of the quality check we kept for the data collection. And for the training and test split, we made sure that the split had not generalized, but had at the spread of most entities that we could get. But since there were, for certain cases like clinical trial or cancer grade, since the number of entity were so low that we couldn't spread it out, that's why we saw somewhere for those entities the models had lower performance, or the scores were not that well compared to the other entities. Yeah, I think that includes the methodology for the training model.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Thanks. So we'll just take a couple more because we are giving you a very thorough grilling on this. So this is an interesting idea for kind of scaling this up to not quite the full text. So a paper has sections with more general information, so the introduction, the discussions, and etc. But more specific information will be in the results and methods. So rather than going from abstract straight to full text, do you think there's an intermediate step where you could scale from abstracts to specific sections of papers to try and extract the information you're looking for?
Yes, I agree with that, and that was That's something that we wanted to explore, but as the project was for just 3 months, we couldn't explore that option. But I think that will help in the performance and getting more entities and avoiding hallucination, I feel, up to a certain level. Because introduction was the part where we got the most mismatched or hallucinating entities. Because introduction is going to talk, yes, there's more general information. So yeah, definitely.
That makes sense. So I think we'll make this the last question because we have grilled you. I'm going to answer this one myself. So where can we access the preprint? That will be the link in your slides, which will be sent out after this presentation, right? The link is in there. I'm pretty sure I saw it. So that's the answer to that. Yep, there it is. And then this one, so this one's just been upvoted, so we'll go for that. So did you ask, so you mentioned that your output was 1 line per entity detected in the sentence that you've given it. Did you try any other specific output formats, and how was the performance on that? Was it consistent?
We tried JSON, but it wasn't consistent. So that's why we kept it by sentence. And then when we extract, like when we did the post-processing, we extracted them using regular expression and then stored them as JSON. So at the end, it became a JSON, but the response was not JSON.